Welcome to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk.
Hey everyone, it's Jenny Lisk, and this is episode 3 of the Widowed Parent Podcast. I really enjoyed my conversation with Wendy Clough for this episode. Wendy has been a widowed mom of 3 girls since her husband died 12 years ago, and last year she started blogging about her journey. We discussed all sorts of things, including Wendy's advice for talking with the kids' schools, and milestones and events that can trigger kids' grief, and her family's experience with a grief support community in Seattle called the Healing Center. I hope you enjoy my discussion with Wendy Clough. My guest today is Wendy Clough, who is joining us from her home in Redmond, Washington. Wendy, welcome.
Thanks, Jenny. Nice to be here.
So I wanted to let listeners know that we actually know each other in real life. And it's kind of funny how we met. We ended up being seated together at a fundraiser at our kids' school. And somebody said to you, Wendy, do you know Jenny? And you said, you know, Facebook keeps telling me that I should know you.
Yeah.
We've actually never met. You remember that?
That's true. That's true.
And that was a bunch of years ago now. And so I've been following along with your blog and your journey. Never, of course, thinking that I would someday be ending up as a widowed parent. But here we are. Nobody expects it, I guess. But I thought it would be interesting to talk to you about your experience, about what you've learned in the last, is it 10 years or more? How long has it been?
It's 12 tomorrow.
12 tomorrow. Oh, wow. Well, thank you for doing this tonight.
Sure. What better thing to do, right?
Well, exactly. You know, and hopefully hearing from people who've been down this path. You know, unfortunately, people will keep becoming widowed. So hearing from the people, you know, a little further down the path than we are, I think can be helpful. I know it's been for me. So I'd like to ask you to start, if you would, please, by reading a passage from one of your recent blog posts. It's the one that is called The Widowhood Puzzle.
Yeah, I can do that. Let's see. Becoming an only parent to your children is one of the biggest pieces of this widowhood puzzle. And it is a puzzle with so many pieces scattered wildly every day. My job is to try my best to pull these pieces together in the right order, in the most efficient and sensible way possible. Many, many times that simply doesn't happen. Not because I don't want it to, but because I just can't. I don't have enough time, resources, or hands to manage it all. But I do my best, and that is good enough. It has to be.
Wow. Thank you. I think that captures so well the reality of being a widowed parent. And I think that so many of us can relate. So thank you for sharing that with us from your blog. Let's actually back up a little bit. Can you set the stage for us a little? I'd love to hear a little bit about your life before your husband died. What was life like?
We lived in Massachusetts. We had 2 children, 2 little girls that were born 2 years apart, and we'd been married, I don't know, 8 or 9 years, something like that, and then we decided to move to Washington mostly because my husband's family had moved out here for one reason or another, and they had all trickled out here one by one, or 2 by 2, and we were like the last ones to come. So we moved here in 2005. Steve worked full-time. My daughter just started kindergarten when we were here, and the youngest one was in preschool. You know, I was working evenings. You know, we were just plotting along. I was very active in PTA. I was very involved in, you know, our church. I was very involved in lots of different activities, and then, like I say, worked in the evenings. And so, yeah, that was kind of us. And we were here 16 months, and Steve died very suddenly. And yeah.
So So can you tell us a little about, so what happened? So you've moved out here, you've got your 2 kids, your life going along normal, presumably. Then what happened?
Everything was normal. Things were really on a kind of a hell of an upswing for us, actually. And just our relationship and things were just really in a good place. And Steve had started having seizures. He loved to say they started right after we got married. And that was kind of true. It was maybe 6 months after we got married that he had his first grand mal seizure. And it happened in the middle of the night. And neither one of us really knew what the hell was happening. I think I got so freaked out that it was almost like I was in shock. Like I had no idea, like, I don't know. It was just very bizarre. Plus you're woken up out of a sleep, so you just don't know what's happening. And it didn't last a terribly long time, but that was the first one. And then we came to realize that he had other seizures probably, but, he'd had auras. He used to describe this sensation he would get to me. And neither one of us knew any better. And I said, well, it sounds like a panic attack or an anxiety attack or something. He said he'd hear like voices. He'd get like a metallic taste in his mouth. He would not hear voices, but hear like if he was listening to something, it would sound like it was in a tunnel. So it was an aura. But he never had a full-on seizure, so that happened for years and years. And but he's a guy. He never really investigated it, and just was like, "This is just something weird that happens to me." And then when he was 20, I don't know how old, 28, I guess, he had a first grand mal seizure, and they progressed from there. He went on medication. He hated being on the medication. Just made him. He felt like it made him very tired, very groggy. It made him like he couldn't find the right words sometimes. But for the most part, they controlled them. He would have a breakthrough seizure, maybe once every 6 months or something. And they were always in the middle of the night. And they were always, they were very similar every time. And nobody ever said to me, you could die from this. I mean, it seems pretty obvious. I know Dennis had seizure, right? I mean, did he have more than one? I don't know. I remember he had that one when he first had it, right? But
he didn't actually have a seizure at any point.
I thought he did.
He started out by being confused, and that's how they did an MRI and found it that way.
Oh, okay. So, the seizures, when you're watching somebody have this grand mal seizure, right? You do think they could die. And sometimes I would call 911 because it was either taking him a long time to kind of fully come out of it, or but I don't think, you don't ever really think it, right, that somebody's going to die. So, and nobody ever had that conversation with me, like, this is a thing. It's called sudden, I have to look it up. I should have that right in front of me. But it's very similar. It's like SIDS, but for grown-ups that have seizures or children. And it's this very rare, but yet not so rare, apparently, once you start talking to people, right? Like everything else. That the seizure starts and it pretty much stops your heart and kills you really fast.
Wow.
And nobody had ever said to me or to him that was a thing. So
it was a big shock then.
It was, he had brain surgery when we still lived in Massachusetts the doctor, we went to a neurologist at Brigham Women's Hospital who thought that he had a small spot on his brain that he thought was a tumor. But he said he thought it was in, the right place, that it could be causing the seizures. And he felt that if he removed it, that it would probably stop seizure activity. And it did for a little bit. It was a hellacious experience, really. It was not great. The recovery was bad. But anyway, he did recover, obviously. And but then the seizure started again. Like, I would notice little things like a tremor in his hand, and always in the middle of the night. But anyway, so they did start again. So he was on medication. They were fairly controlled. And then, he woke up in the morning, and he didn't wake up in the morning. So it was completely unexpected.
Yeah.
And the craziest part of the whole, there's so many crazy parts, but the worst part of it to me, that time was, I woke up at 7 because my alarm went off every morning at 7 in case I wasn't already up. And he was supposed to be at a meeting that morning and was going to leave well before 7, I think. And so like he had his, his laptop, his phone, his whatever, all by the shoes, everything by the chair in the living room so he could just get out the door. And I woke up and I saw this stuff still there and I was like, oh, he overslept.
Yeah.
And so I went to wake him up. So obviously I couldn't wake him up and I called 911 because, I didn't want to accept that there was no help available. But anyway, of course you call it anyway. But
Sure.
So in like in a period of like 5 minutes, you've got, my husband's dead in our bedroom.
Wow.
And my children are directly across the hall. Like there was absolutely no time to, I remember the firefighter or the EMT that came in and he said to me that he was gone. And I was like, really? Like, I just was like, really? And I sat down for a minute, but I remember Maggie had tried to open her door.
And they had still been asleep. At this point, they had still been asleep?
Well, she tried to open the door and she said she had to go to the bathroom. And I said, close the door. Not yet. And I'm sure that they, heard all the commotion. She knew something big was happening, but, and then I said to the guys, like, I walked back out to the living room with them to the living room for a minute. And I was like, I got to go tell my children. Like, it was just the weirdest thing. Like, I had no time to kind of completely fall apart or
to think about what you wanted to say to them, right? I mean, you just had to do it. You
just had to do it because she had to pee. And Melissa was still asleep, but Maggie was up and had to go to the bathroom. And so I just immediately had to go in and tell them that their dad, who they had this great night with the night before, was now, like, you went to sleep and everything was great. Hunky-dory, amazing night. Not amazing. Average night. Right. But the next morning, he's just gone.
Wow. Wow. That's awful.
Was the worst part, really, for me. Was not only having to deal with the fact that he died, but then, like, within 10 minutes, having to tell my children that their dad died. It was like, that was the worst part for me, was having to have it come out of, I just didn't, you don't want the words to come out of your mouth. Like,
and those, it's awful. I mean, there's no way for it not to be awful.
I remember that a lot too about that first day, is that I didn't want to keep saying it, right? Like I didn't want to, they kept saying to me, you have to call somebody. And I was like, I'm fine. And they're like, no, you really have to call somebody. I don't know if I said I'm fine, but I was like, I don't want to interrupt anybody. It's early.
Right.
And I think I just didn't want to keep saying it because it just makes it more real. The more times that you call somebody and say, Steve's died, then it's like, you really get going, huh?
Right.
So that was our first. That was the first day.
And then I think there was another turn of events in store for you rather soon.
Yeah. So maybe a week and a half later, I guess, we had the funeral. Maybe it wasn't that long. I don't know. You have the funeral, and then like a week after that. So we had been, like I said, we were in a really great place emotionally and spiritually, and we really had decided, like in September, that we wanted to try and have another child. And sure enough, it worked. So I found out like the week after the funeral that I was pregnant. And
wow.
That was a little much.
How was that? Yeah.
That was very, I don't know, like I knew it and I accepted it, and I told like a very small group of people, because it just seemed such bizarre information to share with people, and it's something that, your entire life, you're supposed to be happy, right? I mean, and I always remember that I said, I didn't tell my parents for quite some time. And I said to my friend Amy, I was like, I feel like, it doesn't make any sense, but I said, I feel like I'm in high school and I got pregnant. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like it's insane that I'm pregnant. Like, how could I possibly, And that's really what I felt like, almost like I'd done something stupid. And it wasn't. Like, who would think your husband was going to die? And
Sure. And one day you were a married woman with 2 kids and hoping for another. And then now all of a sudden, husband's dead and you're pregnant.
Yeah. So I think I found out that I was pregnant, and I went to the doctor, and, you're so freaked out anyway when things first happen. And I, was thinking, well, our insurance is going to be over very soon. I only had insurance, for like till the end of the month. He died. Like, his company did not go out of their way to be amazing to us or anything. So, and I mean, in my head, I thought, oh my God, we're going to be like without insurance and blah, 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 So I wanted to get as much done as I could before the end of November. So I went in for an ultrasound, and I did all the health stuff you need to do, but I was just kind of like not processing it really, because it just felt like I couldn't, you have this unbelievable grief and sadness, and you're dealing with your kids' sadness and trying to manage everything, and there's so many details, and then to have this other thing happening that's so completely different and happy. Like, it took me a really long time I was never unhappy that I was pregnant. It just freaked me out. Like, it just was so bizarre, but I was never like, I had one friend in particular who asked me if I was going to keep the baby, and I was like, and I get it. I get it. But that was just never an option for me. I was like, are you kidding? Like, this is this amazing thing that happened. But I get it. People are like, what are you doing? That's kind of, I think that didn't help my whole feeling shitty about it, what I mean?
Right.
But anyway, so it was very, but then it was cool because everybody you told was unbelievably happy. And, I think it's really difficult at first and for a long time that everybody you talk to is so sad for you, right? And so like, are you okay? And you're so sad, and you're almost trying to reassure people, that you're okay, like they're sadder than you, or you know what I mean? And so I think it was so to have all of a sudden this kind of happy thing to share. People are like, oh, thank God, we don't have to be sad anymore. Like, yay, you can celebrate the baby, and let's have a baby shower. No. Like, I think people are so quick and want to get past it so fast, the grief, and don't know how to address it, and they can't fix it. They can't, but I can make it. I can get you baby clothes, and I can buy you diapers. I know I can fix that.
Right. That's true. That's such a good point. And I found that too, right? People wanted to help walk the dog, pick up the kids, do some weeding in the yard, or bring a meal. So you're right. Yeah, having the baby to focus on gives some people something positive to kind of hang on to.
Yeah. It was really huge, and it was. I told my girls, because I didn't want to tell anybody too fast, because I think I was kind of thinking that something was going to go wrong with the pregnancy, just because this horrible thing had just happened, which doesn't really make sense. Because then my friend Sonia said to me, "No, it's like World According to Garp." I don't know if have you read the book or seen the movie?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's so good. But one of the things they're looking, he and his wife, young wife, I think, I don't remember if they had kids yet or not, but they're looking for a home. They wanted to buy a house, and they couldn't find a house, and then they find this house, and they love it. And then out of nowhere, a plane comes and just flies right into the house. Oh. And Garp is like, we'll take it. And she's like, what? He said, it's been disaster-proofed. It's perfect. We'll take it. Nothing else could ever go wrong. And I was like, I guess that's it. We're like Garp. So I told my kids Christmas morning, and then I told my family and, his family and stuff Christmas time too. So so Hope was born almost exactly 9 months later.
Wow. Okay. And when Steve died, how old were your older girls?
6 and 4.
6 and 4. Okay.
Yep.
So what were some of those early months like as a widowed parent, getting your head around this whole new solo parent thing? What was particularly challenging, do you think?
I remember feeling, especially I think the time of year didn't help, the fact that it was November. It was cold. It was raining a lot. It was, and I just felt so cold all the time, which is very unlike me, especially these days. But, and I just felt, everything just felt ugly. And I can't even explain that, except like everything just felt wrong and ugly. Like it just felt, I remember spending a lot of time not at home. Like I tried really hard to overschedule us so that we had something to do all the time, because I didn't want to be away from home, like sleep away from home. I didn't do that for quite some time. That freaked me out for some reason, but I was trying to like fill up the time, like I just couldn't stand to just be home and stare at the walls and realize that he wasn't there. I don't know. So we, so many people wanted to have us over for dinner, or we went to this event or that event. And so I remember trying really hard to stay busy, which was, I guess that's okay. I don't think that's a bad thing. But I really stopped cooking. And that's really not come back. I used to be, and I'm a really good cook, and I used to love to cook. And I would, like I said earlier, I was working in the evenings when Steve died, and, it didn't matter if I was going to work. Like I had full-on dinner ready before I left to go to work and whatever. I don't enjoy it anymore. Like Thanksgiving, when I start cooking for Thanksgiving and we're not having, but to make stuff, like I enjoy it every now and again, and getting, especially if it's stuff that's, has memories behind it or whatever. But boy, I just have never really gotten back into cooking. I mean, we have spent so much money eating out and had so much, every night it was, so where do you want to eat?
Right. Where do you want to take out from tonight? Right. I'm going to.
Yes, okay. Now nobody will eat McDonald's anymore, which is fine. I don't like it either. But I mean, it was just pizza, Pagliacci. What do you want for dinner? Right. I mean, and people, people give gift cards, which was so lovely, like to restaurants and stuff. And like, I'd be filing through my wallet, like, okay, tonight we're going to Cheesecake Factory. For the longest time, I didn't cook at all, and now I'm like. Now at least Trader Joe's cooks for me a little bit.
Right.
So that was hard. I remember just having no interest in that, but it was really hard for me, like managing my own grief and then also managing what my kids were going through, because it always felt like we were very on a different wavelength. Like I'd have a really good day, and then Maggie would come home from school and completely fall apart. And it would be like, it would just, you're so tired anyway. That's one thing I remember clearly, is just being so tired all the time. And so to try and support them and manage their pain and their grief too, especially if you were feeling like you were in a different place, like, oh my gosh, I'm having a good day today. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I gotta, I think that part is really hard. And I think that part, dealing with your own grief and your own stuff when you've got kids is really difficult, because you don't really have the time to do it. And I can remember that, we'd go to dinner someplace or whatever. We'd do for dinner and come home, and the kids would take a tub, go to bed, and then I had a routine where I'd eat some key lime pie that I was addicted to. And then I found on some cable channel, that they were starting the original Beverly Hills 90210 from the beginning. So I started watching that, an episode or two of that every night. And then once that was over, then I'd fall apart. And I'd completely cry and be a mess for like, I don't know, doesn't matter, right? 5 minutes to an hour. Then I'd go to bed.
Right.
Well, I never had... Sorry, go ahead.
Some of that sounds like it falls in the kind of the self-care category, right? I mean, get the kids in bed, and then you have some time to unwind, do something you enjoy.
Yeah. I think if I hadn't been pregnant, I think that I would have been a complete drunken mess most of the time. So it's probably a blessing that I found out I was pregnant. But for me, I think probably food is probably always been my drug of choice. Like, I love wine, but I love food. So it's always been a lifelong challenge for me. And so to be able to sit there and eat this key lime pie that I found at the grocery store, It did. I guess it is a little bit of self-care, right? Like it felt good, and it made me feel, I don't know. It was all I could do, right? It was like a drug. Like, okay, let's have some sugar and some fat, and then. But yeah, I mean, you have to let yourself be sad too. I think you don't have to anything. I think that's one thing that people struggle with is like, oh, why can't I cry? Or I'm crying too much, or I should be feeling this way or that way. And one thing that I definitely was taught, not right, I sort of just heck didn't know myself, but that whatever it is you're feeling is okay, you know, like, no, if you feel like you need to go out and kill somebody or, you know, rob a bank, that's not okay. But in general, you know, whatever you're feeling is fine. If you're happy, that's okay, right? Be happy. Right. You're allowed to feel, because God knows you feel it all, one way or the other. And
it's so important too to help the kids get that message, I think.
Yeah, that's one thing, and I think everybody experiences this too. I don't know, but it was very weird for me that, you know, the day that Steve died and the days that followed when, you know, family comes in and relatives and friends and stuff are all coming over and you're sad as can be and a mess. And then you see your children like playing and laughing and it like makes you happy, but it's also really weird. Like, and I came to learn too that kids just can't do it. You know, they can't handle it all at once. So they kind of go in and out of it, right? Like they're sad, but oh my God, my cousin's here. Let's go run around and play with them. So that was interesting to me. I remember thinking, this is, even that morning when my house was full of, you know, police and, because, you know, they had to investigate. Because, you know,
I've heard that.
Man.
Right,
so,
right.
They actually had a detective come and everything, and it was cracking me up. But anyway,
that's all you need, right?
Yeah. But so even that morning, right away, and they were so wonderful. The guys that came to help us that morning, the EMTs and everything. And I remember Maggie she used to have so many stuffed animals, and she was bringing out her stuffed animals to show them, and the guys were laughing with her and everything. And I was like, like it just felt so. Yeah. But you're happy that they're happy, but it's like there's just something so off about it. But there's something so off about it, the whole experience, I think.
That's true. That is true. True. We were talking one time, I remember you mentioned that there was I don't know what you call it, a grief center type place that you guys had found helpful. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And they have adult and kids programs, or how did that work?
They did, yeah. I was working. I started a new job after Christmas that year. And I just remember one day I was at work thinking, all right, you're kind of a mess. The kids are a mess. Things are feeling, you know, I think it was that it was becoming more and more real. And I was getting more and more pregnant. And, you know, the kids were just dealing with it in different ways. And I just felt like, okay, it's time for us to get some sort of support outside of, you know, what we'd been doing so far. And
so this was like 3 months in, 3-4 months
in? Yeah, maybe 3 months, something like that. And somebody had told me about this one program at a local hospital that was part of their hospice program. And I called and talked to them. And they had a program that was for me and something that my oldest daughter would have fit into, but nothing for my youngest daughter. And I kind of felt like she really did need something. And I wanted to do something that we could all do together. It just really felt, even before I found the other place, I was like, it just doesn't feel right. Like Maggie and I are going to go get support and she's not. Like it just seemed weird.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I think they probably told me about an organization called the Healing Center in Seattle. And it was a wonderful place for us to go. That was a family grief support center. So they had, it was in a very cozy home in Seattle that had been converted to this, you know, great center for kids and for adults. So they had groups for children of all different ages, and they had support groups for widowed parents, primarily younger widowed parents. Not all parents, but primarily younger widowed people. Mostly were parents, but and they had groups for if you were, you know, you just had experienced a loss, or if you were 6 months to 2 years away, and then they had groups for people that were even further out than that. And then they also had, events where you could be there together with your kids. And it was just a really great, warm, supportive place that really offered us a lot of what we needed at the time, which was a place to talk about it. And I think it was so important for my kids to be in groups with other children that had experienced the same thing. Mm-hmm. Because it really, I think, when it happens to you, you really feel like you're the only person in the world that it's ever happened to, right? And and I felt like that. I mean, I can remember going to the grocery store, and I always, for the longest time, I felt like there was a spotlight on me. Like, I just felt like people know, and it was the weirdest thing. And so I know kids kind of have that same, and most of their friends have never been through that, right? And so it was really cool, I think, for them to be just in the midst of 10 other kids in a group maybe that had all lost a parent. So that helped them to normalize it a little bit and not feel so odd about it. But yeah, we went there on and off for probably a couple of years, and I worked there for a little while after Hope was born, and Hope went to class, to a couple of little groups there and stuff. So it was really impactful on our lives, and I think it was a really important piece of us being okay afterwards, and coming through it as okay as you do,
Right. No, that's great to hear, and I'll put that link in the show notes for sure, because for anybody who may happen to be in Seattle, I think that'd be worth checking out. And I've heard of some other places in other parts of the country that probably have some similar services, so maybe other people can find something where they are.
Yeah, it's similar to the Dougie Center in Portland, Oregon, and Dougie does a lot of training for other organizations throughout the country and maybe throughout the world. I don't know, but
so they may have a list of links or something on their website of different cities. Okay, I'll go and find that as well.
A good resource for people, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, I'll link to that for sure then. One thing I was curious about, they say that one of the hard things about kids' grief, which is a little bit different from adults, is that since they're still growing and developing, I've heard that they often need to re-grieve their loss as they go through different developmental stages. Is that something that you've seen or heard other people talk about?
Yeah, I definitely heard a lot about that when we first went, to get therapy and counseling and everything around it, because you don't know any of this stuff until you need to know it, right?
Right.
So I did hear that quite a bit, and like my kids were so little when it first happened that, I think it kind of goes from being this weird, like for Melissa, she was 4, so I feel like it was kind of this, almost this make-believe kind of, it was just, she just really couldn't process it. And Maggie was just enough at the other edge, she was 6, where it was more real for her and more concrete. And I definitely noticed that switch, from 4 to 6 or 4 to 7 for Melissa. And she kind of had to come to this whole different understanding of it as she was 6, 7, 8 years old. And then I think as you go through these different milestones in your life, like, my oldest daughter went to a private school, and they do a big deal graduation at 8th grade. And everybody there, with the exception of her and somebody else, was going to have both their parents there, right? Even if their parents were divorced, they're both going to be there. And that was, one of the big, First Communion was big. And then this was a big event when she was in 8th grade that her dad wasn't going to be there for. So I think it's like developmentally, yeah, for sure, that you process it in a different way. And I also think it's these events that just trigger it, like the stupid 8th grade graduation, they have a father-daughter dance. And I was like, do we really need to do that? Yeah. Like, there's so many times in your life for a father-daughter dance.
Right.
Like, you need to do it here, And so they sort of changed, like when my youngest was in kindergarten and their teacher wanted to do a father-kid father-kid pumpkin carving event. And I'm like,
Oh,
really?
yeah.
I don't think that's necessary.
Right. Right. Because I can carve a pumpkin too, right?
Yeah, like, what are you doing? And then I think that's a big, so yeah, I think that there's all these little events that trigger it. Could it be Father's Day, of course, right? But I mean, these major events in your life that you feel like your parents should be there for, and of course is gonna be there for, and they're not. So that just triggers it. But it's definitely a developmental thing for sure.
Yeah.
And then I think there's so much to be said for educating, like, educators who you think would know this stuff, like having a father-daughter. Really? Because you have a kid in your class, too, that don't have a dad. You really think you should have a father-kid?
Right.
I mean,
activity, right.
And then when my daughter, when Maggie was in 4th grade, so just like 2 years later maybe, her teacher, around this time of year, around, October, had them each write an obituary and a headstone for someone in their family, pretending somebody had died. And I'm like, are you kidding me? When she told me, and I went in and talked to the teacher, like, are you kidding me right now? Oh, it's just a creative writing experience. I'm like, no, it's not.
Right, right. Yeah.
So I think there's just so much education that needs to be done around, and it doesn't happen because people don't like to talk about it,
Well, and I've been reading some statistics, and I don't, off the top of my head, I can't remember, but the number of children who've lost a parent in this country, that they say that just about every classroom probably has one kid who's lost a parent, and maybe not every single classroom.
Like one out of 18, or no, it was one out of something by the time they were 18.
Okay.
Was going to have lost a parent. I can't remember the statistic
right either. It's something like that. Yeah.
It's a lot.
It is, right. It's more common. It's actually way more common than I realized, and I started realizing it once I got into this situation.
And I think we also, are in this weird situation that you and I, our kids were together at the same school and part of this, similar organizations for a little while, and had a lot of dads die. And I mean, it's just been like, what is going on? So, I mean, I think it's horrible, but I think all these people that have watched, all these families live through this, it's been, a good educational experience for them to see, like, oh, okay. And to see I don't know how your kids, how much they love to talk about Dennis, but like my kids will talk about it at the drop of a hat, right? Like they don't mind talking about their dad. They don't love saying my dad died. They don't love that at all, but Maggie does. My oldest kind of does. But they don't, I think it's because we talk about them so freely at home, and I try so hard to, like yesterday I went, we went to Wendy's. She was really hungry when I picked her up from therapy. So Wendy's was right around the corner, and she got little chicken nuggets and fries and a chocolate frosty. And she was taking a fry and she was dipping it in her frosty. And I said, that's just what your dad used to do. Like I said, never knew anybody that did that until I met him. And he loved to dip his French fries in a chocolate milkshake. And she just, because she doesn't know him at all, like that stuff just tickles her, right? Like, and she just smiles, like thinking that she's doing, but so I just really try all the time to say, oh, this is what your dad used to do, or your dad liked this music, or oh my gosh, Daddy loved this song, or oh wow, it was, whatever. I try to bring him up as much as possible so that for Hope, I think we kind of feel like we're building in this memory for her, and for the other girls too, because they were so little. But but I just try to bring him up all the time so that it's not
a forbidden topic. It's not, right.
No.
And I think that's such a good point. And I think a lot of people, though, hesitate because it's like, oh, maybe they're not thinking about it right now, and maybe if I say something, then it will be a big deal. They'll get upset, or and I think that, but so many people say exactly what you're saying. People who've been through it, people who know, say no, it actually is important to keep talking about it. Talk about the person who died, what they were like, those stories, good and bad, right?
People that are like a little bit removed, or always often afraid to say something, to you about them, or a memory, or when in reality it's this huge gift, I think, when people all of a sudden, a friend of mine from Massachusetts that knew Steve through business, and he emailed me one day just a few weeks ago and said, hey, I just want to let you know, Steve's name came up today at this meeting that, they always used to go to together. And it's nice. So cool. Like, it just made me so happy. And I was like, how come? And and it's like really kind of, it's just so wonderful, I think, to hear their name, right?
And then 12 years later, somebody else is still talking about them.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I think when people are like, oh, I'm afraid to make you sad, it's like, nothing can be sadder than my husband dying, right? Or whoever you've lost dying. But you saying their name or talking, I mean, and yeah, there are those few people, I think, that they absolutely don't want to talk about it, and they're really old school maybe, or that's how they were raised and that's how they're dealing with it. So sure. But I think for the most part, people are thrilled to talk to your person's old friends or, coworkers. And it's just, it always feels really good to me to have a conversation with somebody about him, because how often does that happen? Right. And it's just, it's really fun to remember them with somebody else, I always think that one of the hardest parts of this whole thing is there's so many memories that you have that you only had with that person. And all of a sudden they're gone and you don't have anybody to like remember that with anymore, and it's really, that's been tricky for me. It's like, because we did so much together before we had kids, and we were together a really long time before we got married and had kids. And so there's just so much, and like they were, the only other person there, right? So it's really weird to have all these memories and nobody to share them with like you used to. So, so when somebody else brings up anything about them, it just feels really cool because they're the only other person that's going to do it, So.
School came up a little bit. I just want to circle back to that for a second, if we could. One of the things I've been thinking about is like, as obviously at the time somebody dies, those teachers are very involved in knowing what's going on and supporting your child. But over time, as maybe they move to a new classroom next year, but maybe, when they move to middle school or high school, they move to a new school, whole new set of teachers, nobody knows anything about your family's backstory, right? One of the things I've wondered, do you go and sit down with the counselor and say, let me give you the whole deal? Or do you just kind of let it come up, if and when it becomes something that needs to be addressed? Or, I'm wondering what you think or what you've experienced around that.
When the kids were still so my oldest went to a school that she was at through 8th grade. And so every year I would send an email at the beginning of the school year. And I did that, I guess I really did it for both kids all the way through middle school. Hope, my youngest, I didn't do it this year, but a teacher, I've done it for all three at the beginning of the school year. Once they start high school, it seemed silly because the teachers don't get to know you on that same level. And, if they want to share it at that point, they can. But up until then, I just felt like it was a really big part of who they are. And, I would say things like, they absolutely don't mind talking about him, that it's not, they may not love saying that my dad died, but, if you ask them questions about their dad, they'll love to talk about it. But, just to make you aware around things like Father's Day, or around things like when you're asking the class questions, I don't tell the teachers what to say or what not to say. I just want to kind of make them a little bit more aware. And I think it's, a lot of the times they already knew, but I think sometimes it gives them permission to kind of talk to you about it too. If they, if they see something that they think you should be aware of about it, or I don't know. I just always want to have this open dialogue with my kids' teachers where they feel like I want to be able to tell them whatever I think and want them to know, and I want them to tell me the same thing. So I've always done that until high school. So I didn't do it with Melissa last year, or Maggie, but when she was in high school, and I only didn't do it this year with Hope because her teacher already knew and actually went through something really similar a year ago. So that's been an interesting thing too, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, that's something that's been on my mind as the new school year started recently, and my kids have switched schools. So, okay.
Yeah, I don't think it's ever a bad idea, right, to give the teachers every bit of information that you can, and the counselors too if they need to. But for me, it's more about the day to day.
Sure. Okay. Let's see. I forgot to set a timer, so I have no idea how long we've been talking. I feel like we've covered so much. But I guess one other... I
think it's almost an hour.
Is it really? Wow. Okay. Well, in that case, I do have a couple questions I'd like to ask all my guests. One is, what would you say is either the best advice or the worst advice in terms of widowed parenting that you think you've gotten over the years?
Let's see. I don't know what the worst advice would be. I think that one thing that somebody said to me along the way that's kind of good advice, but also kind of regarding the bad advice or sometimes people say things to you and you get really pissed about it, like it sounds awful, and I just try to remember they're coming from a place of good. Most people are trying to do the right thing, even if they completely screw it up and they say it weird and you're like, what is going on? Most people are trying to come from a place of good, and they just don't really know what to do. So I think so many people are trying to do the right thing and they don't know how to handle it. And so I guess that's one piece of advice for the good and the bad. It's just, try to, look at everything and that's not always true. I have to say, my situation with my family and with Steve's family and friends when he died, everything was lovely, right? Like, we did not have any big family division. We didn't have major issues, people fighting, all this. But wow, the stuff that I have heard, and I'm sure that you have too, since you've been widowed, like about some families and what they go through and the way that this death affects the family in such a horrible way. Like, not only did the person die, but everybody's fighting or hating each other or never going to talk to each other again, or there's huge money issues and all this stuff. So we didn't have any of that, thank goodness. But it's definitely interesting, another way to see how grief affects everybody differently. But I would say the biggest thing that I learned is just kind of one thing I said earlier, is that no matter what you're feeling, it's okay. That if you're feeling really sad and it's still, 12 years later, that's okay, and that if you're really laughing and having fun, you don't need to feel guilty for that, like, it's whatever you're feeling is really okay. And that, I think, helped me a lot and helped my kids a lot too.
Okay, perfect. Well, I think that's a great place to end, a great note to end on. So
sounds good.
Thank you for that. So my guest today is widowed parent and blogger. We didn't talk about your blog too much, and blogger Wendy Clough. Wendy, if listeners would like to find your blog or connect with you, where can they find you?
So the blog is located at wendycloughonline.com. So it's the blog is called Unintentional Survivor, which you can Google that too, I imagine. But it's Wendy, and then the last name is Clough online. So yeah, it's a blog that I started writing just a year ago, and it just felt like a good time to start putting some stuff down, and it's felt good, and I hope it's helpful to other people that are newly widowed, or I don't know. Well, it's been good.
I've seen by the comments, on social media and stuff, it seems to be very well received. People appreciate your writing and your sharing your perspective and your journey and your stories and your experience for the last 12 years. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for speaking with me today.
Thanks for asking me.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Wendy Clough as much as I did. You can find show notes and all the links at widowedparentpodcast.com. Look for episode 3. I love to hear from listeners, so drop me a line at jenny@jennylisk.com or connect on Instagram. You'll find me at @LiskJenny. That's at LISKJENNY. And remember, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends or share on social media. You can subscribe so you don't miss next week's show. Just go into iTunes, which is now called Apple Podcasts, and click subscribe. And hey, thanks for listening. Until next week, keep smiling.
Thank you for listening to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk. Connect with us on social media and at widowedparentpodcast.com.